Before I went ahead with my plans for this review, this was actually a series that I was really looking forward to rewatching, because this was a series that I remember watching a lot when I was little. Yeah, despite me being around in the 2000s and having memories with things like SpongeBob, Jimmy Neutron, Chowder, Total Drama, Flapjack, and several others, as well as a lot of preschool shows from Nick Jr. and Noggin, there's actually quite a number of shows from that time that I don't remember all that much. I had fond memories watching Cat Scratch, as well as Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and Camp Lazlo when I was able to watch Cartoon Network whenever I would go to my grandma's. But prior to 2008, most of my memories of watching cartoon shows were either with SpongeBob or any show that aired on Toon Disney. I say this because alongside SpongeBob, Pucca was one of the first TV Y7 cartoon shows that I would be looking forward to watching whenever Toon Disney switched to Jetix during the evening. The show, from what I remember, would always air after Power Rangers, and that's really the only memory that I have related to Power Rangers back when it aired on Toon Disney and Jetix. And out of the shows that have aired during that point on Jetix, I remember that this show was actually my favorite out of all of them, and ironically is one of the only shows that I remember from that block besides Yin Yang Yo and Power Rangers. So out of curiosity, I decided that since I decided to do the Sean's Network Reviews series, where I take a look at certain shows that barely anybody talks about, or I think are interesting to talk about, I decided to go ahead and add this show to a list of shows that I would review in this series, basically to see if this show holds up well. And after experiencing certain shows and preparations for reviews on them, this show is a breath of fresh air in comparison. Let me put it like this. Of the shows that I decided to marathon in preparations for reviews, this one is one of the best that I've watched in quite some time. After sitting through shows like the Tom and Jerry Comedy Show, Robot Boy, Ollie's Pack, and Thundercats Roar, and also having the entirety of Kuku Harajuku to watch/rewatch, and also watching through things like Making Fiends and Camp Coral, which are two shows that I don't have much to say about, except me saying that Making Fiends is okay and Camp Coral had two problems that brought it down, when the show might have been okay without those problems. This show was exactly what I needed to watch in order to put me in a good mood, because I'm going to say it right now, Pucca was a show that I really liked when I was little, and after rewatching it recently, I can see exactly why. Because I adore this show a lot. Is it my favorite cartoon ever? Well, no. Ever since the end of 2007, when I started watching Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network a lot more, there have been a lot of shows that I've gotten into watching, to a point where this show did fade from my memory for a while until around 2018 or 19, when some YouTubers brought this show up in videos, particularly Phantom Strider 8. And also, while I did watch the show a lot back in the day, there were times where I did end up missing a rerun of the show because I ended up getting bored while watching that Power Rangers series. I was 6 years old, to be fair, and the guy that me and my mom were living with at the time were rough and hard times for personal reasons that I don't want to go into at all. So for these particular reasons, my memories with this show were rather fuzzy. My only memory with this show at the time was that it was about a girl being in love with a ninja that didn't have the same feelings for her that she does for him. So rewatching it recently really gave me a fresh idea of what the show actually is. I ended up finding much better shows out there that has jaw-dropping plot twists and are a lot better than I remember them being. But out of all the shows that I'm reviewing so far in Sean's Network Reviews, this one is the best one that I'm reviewing so far, even beating out Nightmare Ned and Teacher's Pet. Giving a history lesson real quick, Pucca started off as an online e-card service made by the company Vooz in 2000, which eventually led to Jetix acquiring the rights around 2004, and that led to the 2-minute shorts being made. In the veins of things like The Simpsons and Making Fiends, there were a bunch of shorts with these characters, before the show would officially come out years afterwards. I decided not to watch the shorts prior to or after watching the actual shows this time, like I did with Making Fiends, since there is a lot to talk about with the show and its CGI revival, whereas with Making Fiends, it's a pretty short series, and I would need to watch the web series to see if it's better or worse than the actual Flash animated show. Pucca is a different story, since I do love this show by itself, and the CGI revival as well, but that's a discussion for later. But from what I've heard, these shorts were pretty different in terms of characterization. Garu, for example, actually did have feelings for Pucca in the original shorts. And you could tell in some of the environments and backgrounds that these were internet projects that didn't have a television budget backing them up to be able to get the same amount of action sequences in high detail that the actual show would get. Finally, in September of 2006, the official show would make its debut to the world, and everything afterwards that I described. So what is this show about? This show revolves around an 11-year-old girl named Pucca and her never-ending quest to get love and attention from her crush, who is a 13-year-old ninja named Garu. And together, they have an endless beef with Tobey, a ninja that has a long rivalry with Garu, and Ring Ring, a girl that has a rivalry with Pucca, since she also has a crush on Garu, and so many other villains that they need to defend Suga Village from. And the rest of the series involves a Tom and Jerry-esque tone with two of the main characters not having any dialogue, but the characters around them understand what they mean by the sounds and giggles that they make. To begin with my discussion about this show, let's first start off with the animation. This show definitely doesn't have the best Flash animation. I mean, the Flash animation in this series isn't as good as what we've seen in shows like MLP-FIM or The Amazing World of Gumball, but for what it is, it's pretty good. The animation in this series avoids a lot of the pitfalls that you would see in Flash animated shows. Flash in general has a pretty rock-bottom reputation in general because something would always feel very off in some of these shows, or the movements feeling very robotic and floaty, not to mention feeling extremely jarring after you would get used to these shows in particular being in hand-drawn animation. And other strictly made Flash animated shows in particular would be bottom of the barrel in this regard, with hideous looking designs and being so unlively in motion, especially with its uncanny designs. In other Flash shows, on the other hand, when they move around more complex shapes in Flash, they feel kind of floaty and robotic, to the point of becoming distracting. For what Pucca does, it does its job fairly well. Most of the humor in this show is very slapstick driven anyway, and mostly relies on its visuals to get the humor rolling, and Pucca does the job right. And this in particular might actually be because of the help from the character designs in this show. All of the characters in this show are very simple and cutesy, and I think it helps the animation blend in nicely to not make it become distracting in the end of the day. It's kind of a similar reaction that I have towards Ah Real Monsters. The show being simple designed while having it be motion tweened is never jarring, and helps you focus on things like the backgrounds and how adorable the characters look. While it is a little noticeable at first that this show was done in Flash, it starts to ease its way as the show goes on. However, for the most part, the animation in this show is very good. The problems start forming, however, when mythical creatures or other animals make their way on screen. The overly simple designs on the sharks and dragons or whatever makes it obvious that the show was Flash animated, and the actual animals in this show kind of look like they were made out of clip art or were taken out of a Flash game, due to how very simplified they are in comparison to animals in certain other cartoons of its kind. And that does bring down the animation just a smidge, unfortunately, because other creatures do make their appearances more often than not. But that doesn't ruin the animation from getting a ton of points, because this show's character designs look very cute. which enhances the fact that other certain characters have cute personalities of their own. And a lot of the time, the animation has kind of an anime-esque approach, with some of the expressions and symbols that pop up from time to time. The same thing also applies to the 3D revival. I'll be talking more about these episodes when I don't have anything else to bring up about the 2D episodes, but I decided that since I was bringing up the animation, to also bring up the animation from the revival episodes. So my thoughts on the animation in the revival episodes is that the animation, just like in the 2D episodes, does their job very well, since the animation in these episodes avoids a lot of the pitfalls that 3D animated shows fall into. I go much more in depth in my Camp Coral review about my problem with 3D television animation than I'm going to in this review, but to summarize this quickly, 3D animation on television usually fall into two problems. Either having a huge frame rate issue, or looking extremely plastic, which could end up making the show become extremely dated in the near future. And others like the Penguins of Madagascar and Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness share the exact same quality as something that is straight to video. In other words, the animation as a whole would be kind of iffy in those shows. While the Pucca revival doesn't have the best 3D television animation that I've ever seen, it does its job nicely. While at first the designs of the characters and stills kind of look off, with some of the 2D elements on the 3D models in comparison to the backgrounds and the models, the animation in general captures the same feeling as the 2D episodes. And you could tell that it was a very easy task to do, since the original series had very simple designs, and the original series in general also had times where it did use some sort of a 3D look in some of its angles. So I do think it's a fitting choice to have a show that already tried to be 3D become 3D in the revival. I also like the backgrounds in this show. Not only are they well rendered for a television quality show, but I think that they captured the look that the original series was trying to go for very well, and recaptures the Chinese culture that the original series was also trying to go for. The 3D animation in the revival of Pucca isn't as good as the animation in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2012, because everything in that show was well rendered to a point of being on par with theatrical animation. The animation in the 3D revival of Pucca is at least better than the 3D animation of other 3D cartoons that I plan to give their own reviews in the future, or have already given reviews to, like Power Players and Camp Coral. But the animation in Pucca's 2 seasons, as well as its 3D revival, are far from the only things that I like about this show. Those things are in the other aspects of this show. Here's a fact that I didn't know about before going back to this show. Each episode is split into 3 6-minute segments for each episode. In a way, for a concept that is as simple as Pucca, the fact that the episode segments are 6 minutes long really helps it out in the end, because like Tom and Jerry, none of the episodes feel like they drag out for way too long, nor do they feel like they are way too rushed, which is usually the problem that other cartoons of its kind fall into, most especially Robot Boy and the Tom and Jerry comedy show in both of these categories. In Pucca, everything is so entertaining to watch due to the jokes and slapstick that the episodes actually do feel like you're watching a regular episode of any other cartoon show that is 11 minutes long, because the pacing feels balanced enough to warrant those 6 minutes. I mean, sometimes the pacing can be an issue, like in the episode Noodle of the Star, but that's mainly due to the fact that it's one of the more story-driven episodes of the show, and those usually require the episodes in particular to be longer. Or in one of my least favorite episodes, Man of the Treehouse, where Abio and Garu build their own treehouse and don't allow Pucca or Ching to come up into the treehouse because they're girls. Hey guys, do you remember the Fairly Odd Parents episode Love Struck, which stereotyped all men as gross and generally left things messy, and women as uptight and likes to clean up everything around them? That's basically this episode right here. Throughout the episode, Abio and Garu to an extent are being sexist towards Pucca and Ching. And the episode continuously shows that Garu and Abio's treehouse is a wreck, is constantly dirty, and the noodles that they have is rotten and has flies around it, while Pucca and Ching's treehouse is clean, spotless, and has fresh food. You guys do remember who these characters are, right? I mean, ignoring how Pucca likes to chase Garu around, she likes to hang out with her best friend Ching, and she usually helps her guardians out with the Go Wrong restaurant a lot of the time, and Garu is heavily into martial arts and also helps Pucca's guardians with the restaurant as well. And he actually does have points where he does care about Pucca. Not all men are dirty, and not all women keep everything spotless. But the other big issue with this episode, besides the way that stereotypes Abio and Garu, as well as Ching and Pucca, is actually the pacing of the episode. Most of the episode revolves around Garu and Abio trying to get into Pucca and Ching's treehouse, and not enough time is actually spent on Garu and Abio regretting what they said to Pucca and Ching, or even slowly transitioning to the point where Garu and Abio actually do want to go into this treehouse, which is what these stories usually do. Which also reminds me of the SpongeBob episode Drive Happy, which, besides the fact that that episode was boring, the conflict was not properly built up, making the plot of SpongeBob not wanting that car anymore to feel sudden, like there were a few scenes missing. And there's also another one of my least favorite episodes of this show, Garu Down Under. The episode about Garu being adopted by an Australian who thinks that he's a baby has very similar pacing problems, with the ending where Garu escapes coming out of nowhere. And I honestly believe that there could have been more sequences with it enhancing the fact that Garu doesn't like what this Australian is doing to him. And the episode itself has a very similar issue as the Unikitty episode Pet Pet, where this Australian doesn't realize that Garu isn't a baby and that he's 13 years old, but the Australian is blind to the point of being kind of idiotic. However, it's somehow worse in this episode than it is in Pet Pet, because there's no song or anything cute surrounding the problem with the episode to be able to give it more points. Admittedly, there is one joke in the episode that I did find funny, and that is the part where Pucca literally mailed Abio and Ching to Australia. I found that part kind of clever. But other than that, if you want to see Garu Down Under done right, watch the SpongeBob episode Have You Seen This Snail instead. But other than those examples that I pointed out, the pacing is usually not an issue in this series. Not only does this show succeed with being all Tom and Jerry-esque, with the fact that the two main characters don't talk but the other characters can understand them, and the fact that each episode can take place in anywhere and everywhere that it wants to, but it also mixes these things with character growth and very interesting characters. Starting off with the main character, Pucca. She's very cute. She's easily one of the sweetest characters in any animated show that you'll ever see, even more than, say, Bubbles from the original Powerpuff Girls. Some people do say that she is kind of a Mary Sue, and yes, I can definitely see where people would be coming from when saying that she's a Mary Sue, considering the fact that in multiple episodes, whenever she gets angry, she goes all Super Saiyan mode on those that messed with her or Garu. But as I stated in my Nightmare Ned review, a character being a Mary Sue or Gary Stu isn't automatically a problem unless they don't have any flaws. Chloe from the Fairly Odd Parents is a bad way to do a Mary Sue character, because she has zero flaws whatsoever, and her supposed flaws is that she sometimes messes things up, even though that show only shows us one time that she actually does mess up, and that one particular time that she messes up contradicted the entirety of the rest of that episode, and the rest of the show afterwards didn't show us any of her flaws whatsoever. With Pucca, there are quite a few episodes of this show that do show Mary Sue qualities, but the entirety of the rest of this series, she does have a lot of things that could be considered flaws, particularly with her crush Garu. While there are a number of points where she does successfully win Garu's heart, usually, Garu doesn't have the same feelings for her as she does for him, which does create conflicts where Pucca would become extremely heartbroken that Ring Ring took him from her, and in one other episode in particular, The Usual Ching, she gets framed for something that she didn't even do. And in episodes like Feud Fight, she runs out of luck when the Go Wrong restaurant trio starts fighting and won't provide noodles for her, which leads to her becoming upset because of how much she's starving, even though I do consider it as one of the weaker episodes of the show because the one that caused the conflict gets off scot-free when he was the reason why the three of them started fighting in the first place. Or in the three-parter, Chef Napped, she starts crying when her guardians get captured, since they are technically her caretakers, and without them, she's basically on her own, and since she's basically 11, she wouldn't have anyone to provide for her or make food for her. And speaking of defending certain aspects of this show, here is also a discussion about Pucca and Garu's relationship in this show. I knew that people did have problems with this in particular, and that Pucca constantly force kissing Garu is unsettling. I can see why some people have issues with this, but at the same time, there are other things that do make these things work. Pucca does have other character traits to her besides loving on Garu. She does care about her guardians and the restaurant that they run. She's a delivery girl. She likes to hang out with her friend Ching, and despite the fact that she doesn't talk, she has a really friendly personality to her. What makes Pucca work is that the most that she does is that she would just kiss Garu, and she manages not to succeed at certain times. Whenever Pucca is just about ready to kiss Garu at points, he manages to run away from her, and there are other times where you do see that she does legitimately care about him and gives as much space towards him as possible. Unlike, say, the Kanker sisters from Ed, Edd n Eddy, where they don't have any personalities, and whenever they're around the Eds, they don't give any personal space to them whatsoever, and they always manage to succeed every single time that they appear on screen around the Eds. And even more proof that Pucca doesn't just have a crush on Garu and that she does give him space is the episode Full Moon Pucca, where Pucca literally takes the moon and puts it close to Garu's place and has him fall in love with her, but she ends up regretting that decision. I think that this episode is basically the SpongeBob episode Breath of Fresh Squidward done right, because in that episode, SpongeBob was being a complete hypocrite because it was basically implying that SpongeBob can do all these things to Squidward, but Squidward couldn't do these things to SpongeBob. In Full Moon Pucca, Pucca is not a hypocrite because she does give Garu some space a lot of the time, and only really chases him whenever she sees him when he comes into town. But while Garu is under the moon's spell, he doesn't give her any space, and pretty much tries to sing a song to her outside of her home while she's trying to sleep. So you could at least see her frustrations with Garu while he's under this particular spell. Not only does Pucca herself show that she does legitimately care about Garu, but Garu himself does show that he does care about Pucca deep down. I don't have as much to say about Garu that I did about Pucca, since the only thing that we really know about him is that he's into martial arts, and then the series finale of the 3D revival and the overall series, Don King vs. Go Wrong, we see that Garu has a desire to have a family, but finds out that those around him can already be considered as his family, and starts crying. But more on the finale in a little bit. In one of my favorite episodes of the show, Slam Bam Birthday Bash, we see that Garu does legitimately care about Pucca when Pucca becomes upset because of a misunderstanding where she thinks that everyone forgot her birthday. Garu goes looking for her and comforts her at the top of the hill that she's crying at, showing that he does at least care about her and that he does show sympathy for her while trying to keep the birthday surprise a secret until it's time. This show also has very unique side characters that really enhances the fact that this show feels Tom and Jerry-esque. It really emphasizes how this is a cartoon show and how cartoon shows are very quirky. You have Ching, who has a chicken that lays on her head, and that is because when the chicken falls off, she starts to become weak, Abio, who is very much inspired by Bruce Lee, and is also the son of a cop that runs the police department of this show. And also, this is the only show where one of the residents of a village that has a Chinese theme will ever have Santa Claus as one of its residents. This show also has some memorable villains, starting off with Tobey. He kind of reminds me of Shredder from the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series because of how his dialogue consists of being as over the top as possible and being one of those Saturday morning cartoon villains that just treats their henchmen as objects. And there's also Ring Ring. I think that it was a pretty good idea to give Pucca a rival because it basically adds conflict that ends up getting solved, and it basically gives out some tension on who is going to be able to get Garu's affection first. And as a villain, she basically works because she both does things that have a lot of stakes around Pucca, and you do not want to make her angry. Oh, and I'm not going to neglect to mention this, and I'm going to mention this before I forget to mention it. Pucca is an incredibly funny show. There's a lot of sight gags, unexpected gags, some pieces of dialogue are also funny, and this show also manages to do puns that both make sense and is very funny. In the episode that I mentioned a little bit ago, Full Moon Pucca, they actually did a pun where after Pucca took the moon over to Garu's place and she walks past Tobey and his henchmen, Tobey says, "Did you see that? Pucca was mooning us." And with how fluent this show's animation is, the slapstick that this show emphasizes also lands very well and can catch you off guard. This show isn't as funny as Rocko's Modern Life, Cat Scratch, or even Chowder, since those shows' jokes revolve around being meta and having over-the-top reactions to the other, but this show did still get some pretty genuine laughs out of me in all honesty. Since I don't have any plans on reviewing this in particular, I might as well bring up the 3D Revival Love Recipe as well, since the revival only had 26 episodes, and some websites do consider this as Season 3. So for convenience, I decided to also consider this as Season 3. Here's a fun fact that I think you guys should know about this show. While I did spend a good amount of time watching the original 2D series while I was little, prior to me rewatching this series in preparations for this review, I have actually never seen a single episode of Love Recipe. And I didn't even find out that this revival existed until I looked up on Google for the list of episodes for this show, and Wikipedia does consider this as Season 3. So what are my thoughts on these episodes? I really like the revival. In fact, that would actually be an understatement. I actually think that these episodes, in a way, are a much-needed upgrade from the original series, including doing things like giving us much more characters, a main antagonist for the series, and giving some of its characters much more pleasant voices. However, these are just minor changes in a revival that mostly keeps the same tone as the original series. I do like how this revival extends the cast of characters, including a new antagonist, 2 assistants for Ring Ring, another employee for the Go Wrong restaurant, 3 new pirate antagonists, and many others. There is one particular change in this revival that was kind of noticeable and jarring, especially in comparison to what we've seen in the original, and that is Ring Ring's crush on Garu. I am fully aware that Ring Ring did to an extent have a crush on Garu in the original series. However, at the exact same time, Ring Ring's character in the original series mostly showed us that she has a hatred towards Pucca, and her love towards Garu was just subtly shown, while in the revival, it's on full display for us to clearly see. And while I do like most of the episodes of this revival, kind of like the original series, there are some points where this revival does give out an occasional stinker. Like in one of my least favorite episodes of this revival, Star Stickers, where the problem with that episode comes from Abio himself. Because throughout the episode, he is continuously selfish, and while he doesn't win in the end of the episode, he doesn't get any comeuppance for causing all of those problems in the first place. Or in the episode Garu in Jail, which, no joke, is completely pointless, and the episode kind of like certain episodes of Robot Boy or Ponapples from It's Pony, has a very gross plot point and a pretty lowbrow sense of humor. But other than those things that I talked about, the Pucca revival is a very huge upgrade from the original, and of the two of these shows, I think that the revival has the definitive series finale. The original series didn't really have a finale, it just ended with a regular episode, despite the fact that the original show did at times tell more story-driven plots, but it ended out with the regular episode anyway. However, with Love Recipe, it did go out with a major bang. In this series finale, which is called Don King vs. Go Wrong, we find out who Don King actually is. We get shocking plot points. Don King almost puts the Go Wrong restaurant out of business, and the episode also goes much more in depth with Garu and his character, as we find out that Garu doesn't have any parents, which is why he basically decided to help Don King a little bit, considering the fact that Garu thinks that he's his father, and he wants to remain as loyal to him as possible. But when Garu realizes that those around him are his family, it brings a lot of satisfaction and basically completes his character arc. And when that particular episode comes to an end, where the Go Wrong restaurant ends up winning the food competition, the way that it shows the end credits makes it feel like as if you just got done watching a movie, showing extra clips, and after those clips are done showing, it shows the rest of the credits in a satisfying conclusion to this show. As for recommendations, do I recommend watching Pucca? Absolutely. If you want to watch something fun and is in the same category as Tom and Jerry and Animaniacs, as well as having something wholesome and endearing to watch, this show is definitely worth watching. I'd recommend not watching the revival until you have at least seen a good chunk from the original. Unlike most cartoon shows, Pucca did start off really good, and it didn't take them a while to find their legs and iron out everything later on. So for this particular series, I would recommend watching this show right from the beginning, and then after watching a good bit from the original, then that would be a good point where you would start watching the Netflix revival. All of the episodes of the original series are available on YouTube, and the revival of the show is available on Netflix if you have a subscription to it. This show might not be my absolute favorite cartoon, but it is really, really good. It's certainly much better than things like the Tom and Jerry comedy show, Robot Boy, and Kuku Harajuku. This is definitely a show that I think should get more attention than it is now. For how popular things like the Powerpuff Girls and Naruto are, I do think that this show deserves more attention than it actually gets, but it's considered as a show with a cult following only for some reason. Although, this is a show that I definitely think deserves to be remembered and given a good introduction.